There are a lot of things that we can't explain, and whether or not you believe in ghosts, there are some places in the world that are just plain scary. Places that give you goosebumps. So, here are the top 15 most haunted structures on Earth. Number 15. Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel. In the 1980s, The Shining managed to make something as harmless as a hotel and turn it into a big scarefest. So now, when you see the Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel in Canada, don't be surprised when chills run down your spine. Built all the way back in 1888 to encourage tourism and bring in the local train economy out of a rut, the Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel is a chateau-style structure that sits right by the gorgeous Rocky Mountains. When you walk inside the hotel, it takes on, fittingly, a more Gothic-style tone. Reports of multiple resident ghosts have been made over the decades, one of which being a bride who allegedly fell down the stone staircase during the wedding ceremony. But it must have been because she said, "Until death do us part," because she's now haunting the halls still in her gown. But if that's a little too scary for you then why not try looking for Sam the bellman, who worked at the hotel until he quit in 1975, promising to haunt the location. Now, the spirit of Sam supposedly moves the guest luggage around when they're not looking. And this is one bellman that you don't have to tip. Number 14. Eastern State Penitentiary. Even within the realm of the living, a state penitentiary is a pretty scary place. But the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia takes things to the next level. First off, the entire structure is built to look like a castle. And when it was built in 1829, they were known for their solitary confinement. Prisoners lived alone, and when they did have 1 hour a day to leave the cell, guards threw a black bag over their head. But when the prison became overcrowded, they had to let their solitary confinement cells go in 1913 to make room for an influx of inmates. But they still needed ways to punish them, with one story saying inmates had their tongues chained to their wrists. Yeah, that's pretty rough. The Eastern State Penitentiary eventually closed for good in 1970, but it's said that some of the inmates still haunt the building's halls. People often say they can hear laughter in the distance, see shadows moving about, and can hear footsteps coming from empty sections. Thousands of people still come to visit each year, and they even throw an annual Halloween party there. So it looks like for some of the inmates, visiting hours are never over. Number 13. Chateau du Brazac. Why does it feel like old castles are always haunted? The Chateau du Brazac is in France, is absolutely a breathtaking structure to look at, but someone else had their breath taken away within its walls years ago. This 7-story castle is one of the tallest in France and is known as the home of the Green Lady, who was supposed to be the ghost of Charlotte of France. According to the legend, she was the illegitimate daughter of King Charles VII and was murdered by her husband when he found out she was having an affair. And guess what color her dress was when she was murdered? Yep, green. It's a story that's as sad as it is scary, but now, as part of her tale of revenge and woe, she roams the chapel's tower room in the wee hours of the morning, moaning and freaking out anyone crazy enough to go up there. Number 12. La Recoleta Cemetery. You can't have a list of haunted structures without mentioning a graveyard or two. La Recoleta Cemetery in Argentina is home to some truly beautiful statues, grottos, intricate tombstones, and mausoleums. It's even home to Eva Perón, better known as Evita. But this good architecture is home to something a bit more sinister. La Recoleta Cemetery has plenty of ghost stories hiding in the walls and through the winding walkways of the grounds, and it's not the type of place you want to be in the dead of night. But the most famous of the ghost stories from these haunted structures tells the tale of David Aleno, a former gravedigger and caretaker who worked in the cemetery for 3 decades before taking his own life. Was he haunted by something before his untimely death? No one really knows for sure, but today people say they can hear his big set of even bigger keys jangling around at sunrise as his spirit walks the pathways around the graves. Perhaps Mr. Aleno has a little unfinished business. Number 11. Jazrat Al-Hamra. The United Arab Emirates is one of the most extravagant places on the planet. It's a beacon representing not just human ingenuity and architecture, but also vast amounts of wealth. And while a lot of the UAE is new, there are still plenty of structures that weren't included in the Great Leap Forward that propelled the area into the future. One such place is Jazrat Al-Hamra. which is 14 miles outside of a major city and in between a shopping mall and a water park. But it's also a literal ghost town. Jazrat al-Hamra was established in the 14th century, becoming a thriving pearl fishing village in the 1800s, and then being abruptly abandoned in 1968. But all of those structures are still there, attempting to defy the sands of time. The first roads, mosques, and houses are all still there and totally haunted. Visitors claim that although the once thriving village is empty, strange noises and ghostly apparitions abound. Many of the locals will also tell you that Jazrat al-Hamra is home to jinn, pre-Islamic versions of genies, who in this particular instance take on the form of animals. Number 10. St. Augustine Lighthouse. Even after automation, lighthouses are incredibly lonely places. Keepers would stay there for weeks, even months at a time, often alone. It's easy to go crazy when you're all cooped up in there too. But the St. Augustine Lighthouse in Florida has a sordid history that draws almost 250,000 visitors a year. Several tragic events took place within the claustrophobic walls of the lighthouse that have given birth to plenty of paranormal activity. The lighthouse keeper once fell to his death while painting the tower, and now his ghost can be spotted watching over the grounds and manning his post even in the afterlife. While he may be harmless, it sounds like one horrifying night. But then there are the sounds of children playing in the lighthouse, even when there are no children present. It's said that decades ago, 3 little girls were playing in a cart that broke and fell into the ocean. As you can imagine, all 3 drowned. But it looks like their game never ended, which is probably why they're still playing after all this time. Number 9. Whaley House. Thomas Whaley built his eponymous family estate in San Diego, California in 1857, right on the former site of the city's public gallows. This already sounds like a recipe for disaster. Not long after Thomas Whaley moved into his new home, he said he could hear footsteps coming from the other rooms even when he was home alone. These footsteps, though, belonged to none other than Yankee Jim Robinson. But too bad Robinson was hanged for stealing 4 years before the Whaley house was built. And the hauntings didn't end there. Whaley's family, plagued with all sorts of tragedies like deaths and suicides, most of which occurred within the walls of the home. If you can believe it, a lot of Whaley's family members still haunt the grounds, which have become a museum, and the smells of their heavy perfumes and cigar smoke can be smelled throughout the place. And seeing as how this site was haunted even before Mr. Whaley got there, we think it's best not to spend the night here, ever. Number 8. Obvodny Canal. The Obvodny Canal in St. Petersburg, Russia, is an artificial body of water that has earned the unfortunate nickname of the Suicide Canal. Construction began in the late 1700s, which was plagued by strange and unfortunate events right from the get-go. Lots of the workers would constantly complain about the persistent headaches, having sudden outbursts of violence, and many, as the canal's name suggests, ended their own lives. So what was going on here? It had to be more than just a simple case of disgruntled, underpaid, and overworked employees. No one really knows for sure, but some stories would tell you that in the 13th century, under Peter I's rule, Swedish knights massacred the women of a small indigenous tribe, and in return the village shaman cursed the knights before he too was murdered. But the shaman and the women were all buried in the place that would become the Obvodny Canal. There is a possibility that the canal's granite plates are their tombstones. Number 7. Rainham Hall. There's no shortage of haunted structures in England. The city is incredibly old, which is probably why so many ghost stories take place there. But if you ever venture out to Norfolk, be on the lookout for Rainham Hall. The haunted 7,000-acre estate that is Rainham Hall was built at the beginning of the 17th century and is easily one of the most impressive structures in that area. It's the former home of one Lady Dorothy Townsend, wife of Viscount Turnip Townsend. The elegant couple lived in the Rainham Hall in the 1700s, and during that time, the lady of the hall was locked up in her home by her husband. And so naturally, her ghost roams the halls, probably making up for all of the lost time she spent as a prisoner. So it's pretty normal to hear things go bump in the night in Rainham Hall. But the scariest part is probably the proof of the spirit's existence in the form of a photograph. In the 1930s, a photographer managed to catch a photo of Lady Dorothy. Number 6. Hofty House. The Hofty House is an incredibly famous home that overlooks the Reykjavik waterfront and it's earned its place in history from all of the famous and historical figures it's housed. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev met there in 1986, and Queen Elizabeth, Marlene Dietrich, and Winston Churchill all spent a night or two on the property. And that's not to mention all the countless British ambassadors. The Hofty House has a history, but it also has a history of being super haunted too. The most famous otherworldly presence who calls the Hofty House home is the White Lady, a ghost that many people believe died at her own hand. The phantom White Lady tends to pop up at all hours of the night, but she's caused so much panic and fear in the Hofty House that one ambassador convinced the British Foreign Office to sell the house immediately. The house was sold back to the Icelandic government that same year, but some Icelandic locals will tell you that the Hofty House sits on a Viking burial site, and every now and then the spirits of the dead warriors will raid the liquor cabinet at night. A drunk ghost, hopefully, is a happy ghost. Number 5. Leap Castle. So many haunted castles, so little time. The Leap Castle in Kildare, Ireland, was built anywhere between the 13th and late 15th centuries, and its bloody history sounds like a page ripped right out of Game of Thrones. But this time, it's all real. Local legends will tell you that during a struggle for power within the ruling O'Carroll clan, one of their members killed his own brother, who was a priest, during a mass held in the castle's chapel. That room is now fittingly known as the Bloody Chapel, and just as you would expect, the ghost of the priest haunts the church at night. In the early 1900s, Leap Castle underwent some renovations, and the construction workers just so happened to stumble upon a secret underground dungeon in the Bloody Chapel that was still home to the skeletons of its victims. But not just one or two skeletons were there. There were so many that it took a total of 3 cartloads to haul them out of there. Upon further investigation, they saw that the dungeon was specially designed so that people would fall through a trap door onto spikes protruding from the ground. But this area was purposely built close to a main hall, so the bloodthirsty clan members could hear you scream while you die a slow, painful death. Number 4. Castle of Good Hope. Castle of Good Hope is a sprawling building not too far from the beautiful shorelines of Table Bay in South Africa. It's built in 1666. And with a number like 1666, you know you're off to a rough start. The Castle of Good Hope was built by the Dutch East India Company as a supply replenishment station for the ships coming in and out of port. But it also served as a military fortress and a prison during the Second Boer War at the turn of the 20th century. It is the oldest colonial building in South Africa, and you can book a tour and check out all the fort has to offer, including the torture chamber. Not only were prisoners tortured at the Castle of Good Hope, but it was also where many people were condemned to death by hanging under Governor Pieter van Noot in the 1700s. So expect to catch glimpses of ghastly specters haunting the grounds. There is one ghost especially that holds the grounds in contempt. Just before being hanged, one of the condemned cursed the governor from the gallows, and Governor van Noot died of a heart attack that very day. Now, in perhaps a fitting end to the story, the governor's ghost has haunted the battlements for centuries, condemned by those he had sentenced to death. Number 3. Zunantanich. Everybody loves a good haunted jungle, and the ancient Mayan ruins of Zunantanich in the jungles of Belize are going to give you just that. The ruin has been abandoned for the last millennium, so all of the ancient spirits have had plenty of time to stir amongst the structure and haunt its exotic grounds. The once home of a sprawling civilization until a massive earthquake caused everything to crumble, explorers were able to find its remnants at the end of the 19th century. Today, it's an important archaeological site, but you've got to be pretty brave if you're going to head down that way. It's said that the ancient city of Zunantanich is haunted by the Stone Lady, your typical lady dressed in white complete with long flowing black hair and a pair of deep glowing red eyes. Eek. The Stone Lady was first spotted when Zunantanich was rediscovered and is usually spotted around the tallest building in the complex, El Castillo. No one knows exactly who the Stone Lady is, but the general consensus is that she was a human sacrifice, with the ritual performed at the top of El Castillo. Number 2. Ponte Sisto. When you've got a city as old as Rome, you know there are going to be plenty of haunts to be had. Every single brick in the city has a story behind it, and some are going to be a little more ghastly than others. One of these stories, though, is about Ponte Sisto. The Ponte Sisto is a bridge that spans over the Tiber near the city's center, and it's a pretty popular spot for lovers' walks at sunset. And it just so happens that sunset is when the ghost of Olympia Maldalchini rides her carriage across the bridge amongst the living. She was a 17th century figure and the advisor to Pope Innocent X, giving her the nickname of the female pope. Maldalchini rode in her carriage across the bridge with haste in an attempt to flee the city after the death of the Pope in 1655, so it would seem that each and every night she's still attempting to flee a city she'll never be able to run from. Don't believe the story though? Then go ahead and sign up for Dark Rome's ghost tours and see for yourself. Number 1. Winchester Mystery House. There was a time in the United States when Winchester was the biggest name in rifles, and many people had unfortunately been shot down by William Wirt Winchester's firearm. But his wife, Sarah Winchester, believed she was being haunted by all of the spirits who were shot down by the Winchester rifle. So when she went ahead and designed a Victorian home, she had to make sure that none of these spirits would be able to find her while she was home. This was by no means your typical house. Sarah Winchester built what is essentially a labyrinth to confuse the vengeful spirits and let them get lost in the house. The Winchester Mystery House is 4 stories tall with 160 rooms, 10,000 window panes, and 47 stairways. And a lot of these windows and stairways lead to absolutely nothing, and it's not uncommon to open a door only to be greeted by a wall or the occasional secret passage. But despite the scares, it's a very popular tourist attraction in San Jose, California. But make sure you don't get separated from the group, because you may never be able to find your way out.
Watch our scary playlist for more top 15 videos about the most scary subjects. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best videos.